And I don't, whatever you say, I'm gonna still recite the prayer that I know and that's dear to my heart, and that's fine. Sometimes everyone is saying Our Father, and I'm going Abana Ladhi Fis Samawati Yataqaddas Ismuka. I'm saying the Arabic version because that's and that's fine too. This is not the point that we're trying to make. The point is, uh, are we going to make efforts to help people who are going to visit us or who are watching us online now that we have an online presence? I mean, it's a question of being open and welcoming, but also expressing uh, our own inclusive spirit that we believe in here. So, gosh, I have a lot of stuff with me here. I'm going to read. I'll just do this so y'all can see me. I'm going to read for you what I wrote in the newsletter. Why inclusive language? No language can adequately contain the complexity of the divine, and yet it is all we have to try to explain God. You'll remember me saying in one of my sermons a couple of weeks ago that the language used to describe God in human terms is a projection of what we know best, and that is ourselves. So the original writers of the books of the Bible used the language of their times to try and capture their perception of God. Therefore, God appears as He. But within that same line of thought that is limited by the culture, the language, and the worldview of the time, God is also a warrior God in the Hebrew scriptures, right? Because for that people, a warrior God was the only legitimate God to have. There were nomad people who needed to triumph over their enemies to gain the land. And God was the God who's helping them achieve that. So you see, what I'm trying to say is that just like we all do, the writers of the books of the Bible drew their own image of God that fit their context. You look at the Psalms and you see God with hands and faces and eyes, and, right? We know that God does not have a human shape, but it helps us relate more to give God attributes of our human nature. And one of these is gender, I'm arguing. However, over the centuries, our understanding of God has continued to change and adapt. And as our image of God and the nature of God expands, we also need to expand our language for God. For example, we understand and believe that God is neither male nor female, nor can we project on God any of our human attributes, but God transcends our human nature and transcends gender. So from this point of view, God could be a father or a mother. The point here when we say father or mother is we're saying that God is the source of all that is, right? I lost where I was. And when we read or translate some of the original text in this way to be more inclusive, like for example, instead of saying when Paul says brothers, listen, hey, what about me? I'm not a brother, right? So when we say brothers and sisters, just in the same way that that's not us changing what the Bible is saying, that's us, it's not disloyal to the text to do that. It's actually the opposite. Theologically, us doing that is being loyal to that spirit of the gospel that is inclusive to everyone, and it's us confessing that this is the word of God that is live, that is dynamic and changeable, and that applies to me today. Because 2,000 years ago, it applied to them to say brothers. But because we believe that this is not a dead word, that this is a word that's alive, we bring it to our context because that's the breadth and the width of the word of God for us. So the point I'm trying to make is we're actually being disloyal to that spirit of the gospel when we make it exclusive. Any comments so far?
Just one, it just seems this connects to our last group about John Wayne and Jesus.
Yeah.
That what we're talking about is pushing back against this masculinization, militarization of Christianity by certain theological sects.
Yeah.
So when we pay special attention, it's pushing back against this, saying, wait a minute, no, you must pull away from that sexualization and militarization of
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
And you can't just sit on the sideline and say, well, we don't believe it, but to say, no,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. That's a great point. It's about where such understanding, such narrow understanding of who God is, could lead us to think about our fellow humans. Just like a feminist or womanist movement started saying that if God is male, then male is God, so to speak, right? Um, so you'll see in many mainline churches today use of different language even about the Trinity. So it was always Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And we see a lot of alternative language today: Creator, Redeemer, and Sanctifier. And a lot of those titles we're drawing them from the Bible and from the tradition. We're not just coming up with whatever just because it's the trend. Some people say, "Oh yeah, you're following the trend." No, it's not. This is deeply rooted in our biblical tradition. Lover, beloved, and love, source, servant, and guide, creator, liberator, and sustainer, creator, Christ and spirit, rock, redeemer, and friend. So all of these are attempts to bring that image of God closer to the liberation that the good news revealed to us. And these are non-sexist ways to express the same ancient truths. We're not changing. We're not telling God what we want God to say. We're actually speaking those same truths, just in different language. It's like a translation. Um, so um, I'm making 2 points today. The first is theological, is that we cannot be loyal to the good news and still use language that is exclusive. And the second point is, how do we want to present ourselves to outsiders? And I'm speaking from a position, I'm really stuck between two worlds, right? Be careful. Yeah, you got to go around me. So I'm a millennial. I think I classify with millennials. 99.99 of my friends are non-believers. They do not want to go to church. And let me tell you, 90% of those do not want to go to church, not because of the doctrines, or not because of beliefs that we get stuck in, right? The debate between churches, but because the church is not inclusive. Like, these are the debates I have with my friends. It's like, no, well, I used to go to church, and then I was told that my gay brother is going to hell. To hell with the church. I'm no longer going there, right? So there is also, we need to think about 10 years from now. Some of us are going to be made uncomfortable with changes. But if we're building for the future, we need to think about people who will come after us, right? How are they going to perceive our churches? I take it as my personal mission in life right now to show some of my friends that the church where I go to is different. You will be welcome at my church. And part of this is us saying, this is our God, because there are hundreds of other churches that are saying the opposite of that, and we need to stand out. So this is where I'm coming from. Our denomination has already made those efforts years ago to shift from that inclusive language. So we're also catching up with our denomination. I brought the new hymnal with me. If you look at the end of it, there is a statement on language. And they talk about language used for the people of God, language used for God, and they talk about the references. So this is a renewed version of the blue hymnals that we used to have, and you'll see that a lot of the old wording had been changed. Well, we know that Jesus referred to God as Abba, Father, right? So Uh, we're not denying that Jesus experienced God as Father. But we don't believe that we all need to experience God as Father. So they talk about that and they say some of that language. But they also change some of that language too. If you just like pass it around if you just like want to look at it. This is the official. This is an official document that issued by the Presbyterian Mission Agency, inclusive and expansive language. So I actually learned a lot about the debate that's going on about like there's gender neutral language and there's gender inclusive language, and that's that. So this is when you get to the nitty gritty of it, right? Like you think about LGBTQIA plus folks who have those different gender identities, and sometimes if we say instead of saying brothers and sisters, we think that's inclusive, right? There is a non-binary person sitting on that chair who goes, well, I'm not a brother, I'm not a sister, so I'm not included, right? So they call it words that have value. They have this chart. That's avoid words like that and use words like that. That's more inclusive. For example, instead of saying brothers and sisters, now we say siblings, right? I mean, we need to catch up. We're like way behind, right? Like even brothers and sisters that you think is inclusive could be exclusive to certain folks. Instead of saying brotherhood, kindred, family of faith, neighbors, humankind. In our daily language, a lot of times, oh, this is man-made, man, right? Like if it's made a long time ago, it's possibly a man who made it. But like just this ship, like, can we say human made instead, right? So some of these words that they suggest instead of men and mankind, people, men and women, which I just said, it may not even apply today. Humanity, humankind, chairman, chairperson, moderator, group leader, presiding official. Instead of saying fellowship, fellow. It's a word I like. I didn't realize it's exclusive to certain people, of course. There's a task force that worked on this, that did their research, right? And talk to folks who are like, yeah, I feel excluded. Community, friendship, koinonia, which is the Greek fellowship. Instead of saying forefathers, ancestors, forebears, kingdom, even the word kingdom, that was actually employed by Jesus. Now you see it replaced by kingdom without the G, kingdom. Realm, reign, which still for me is a little bit military language. Um, layman, lady, member, congregant. Instead of saying clergyman, now we say clergy, minister, teaching elder. And they continue to. You may recall. I talked once about disability theology. They talk about also a lot of exclusive language that we use that we don't know is exclusive. Like, and I quite frankly, I don't understand why, for example, saying birth defect is preferably should be avoided, and or disabled, crippled, deformed, mentally ill, which are words present in the Bible, right? And instead, they suggest choosing words that include congenital disability, persons who are differently abled, physically challenged, or mentally challenged. Um, Instead of saying blind, now we say visually impaired. Instead of saying stand as you're able at church, now we say rise in body or spirit. Uh, Instead of saying minority, now we say racial ethnic people or people of color. Instead of saying third world, we say developing countries, right? Man-made, not natural, human-made. Yeah, so the list goes on. Someone had a comment or? Yes, sir. I will Meyer first.
Okay, yes, I'm a boomer, not a millennial, but I agree with everything that you're saying. And also, most of my friends are not Christian either. I came to Christianity at age 50, and I was hit by a couple of things. From the very beginning, in my private prayer, I would often say, Creator or God instead of Father. In the Lord's Prayer, I was just saying it home. And I was also just hit from the very beginning by Lord. and master and these kinds of things. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this smacks of slavery.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of language in the Bible. Of course, the Roman Empire took slaves wherever they conquered.
Mm.
Outside of just thinking of people of color and so forth, it was just, we conquered you. But nonetheless, I think this has been very offensive to Black people in this
Yeah.
country,
Yeah.
and that Black Lives Matter has spoken out about this.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good point. We cannot talk about gender inclusion without getting to also, people of color and military. It's all interrelated. Pastor West?
So, assuming that, 80 or 90% of spirituality is nostalgia, there is going to be people who absolutely agree with you theologically, historically, but who will say, I've been saying it this way since I was 3 years old.
Yeah.
It operates on a subconscious level.
Yeah.
And it's just the cadence and the words that bring me the comfort.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to them?
Well, I mentioned it earlier. I say the Lord's Prayer in Arabic sometimes because that's how I've been saying it for the last 35 years. And no one is sitting by your side watching what you're saying under your breath. That's fine. The way we present ourselves when a new visitor comes to our church, we have one chance to make a first impression on a visitor, right? Like at my previous church, this gay woman walked in the church, didn't talk to anyone, grabbed the bulletin and sat. And just watch what's going on. She didn't want to talk to anyone. She wanted to know if she's welcome there or not, right? And then afterwards, she came and talked to us and said, thank you for, I felt included. Now, what we put on our program is more than just about me. So what I'm inviting us to think about is it's your spirituality. And, if you want to say it the way that's closer to your heart, go ahead and say it. But what we put on our program is also our image, how we're presenting ourselves to others. Your spirituality is personal as long as you don't try to impose it on others, right? And I'm not saying we need to have that on our bulletin because that's my personal preference. I'm saying that is the most inclusive for others. We need to think where this church is going to be 10 years from now. We can't keep the language that we like that excludes other people. But where are we going to be 10 years from now? Yes. Just what before I just want to pass this around that has some of the Lord's Prayer on it while I receive the questions.
Well, I just see the purpose of this church is consciousness raising in the old boomer terms.
Yeah.
To enlighten, to enrich with fresh perspectives. And we can't be apologetic about that and say, I know this is going to offend you, and I know this is going to upset you.
Yeah.
But there's a purpose, and that's enlightening and raising consciousness, particularly about these issues. It's to develop an ear that says, oh, that doesn't sound right. Even kingdom. Well, not queendom, it's kingdom. Do we have to? They say, well, we have to maybe rethink even that. Even as deep as that concept is, and how we always use the word.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also to answer Pastor Wes's question of like, some people have been used to saying that prayer forever. The PMA, when they issued this document about suggested alternative words, they say language is not value neutral. All words have value and meaning. The words we choose to use communicate our personal thoughts, beliefs, and feelings. Our language is the carrier of culture and mirrors culture. It can create systems of insiders and outsiders. So it's just this like, that's how I like it, but is it about you or is it about the community? Just like everything else we do in church, we may not like everything in this church or everybody, right? But we're here because we're a community. We're not going to agree on everything, I assure you, right? One of these days I'm going to preach a sermon and no one in the church is going to like it. That's fine, but we're still a community. It doesn't make us exclude each other. So So I'm encouraging us to think more in terms of community than in terms of like my personal spirituality.
Oh, I was just gonna say too, and it's also about respecting people and, and their own identity. It's really about making them feel that we're going to respect them.
Yeah, it's also about respecting people and their identity. Absolutely. Any other questions?
Not a question per se, but a comment. I think one of the things that's important as we kind of move forward is to think about our own language in saying, I struggle with my daughter to talk about people who are, instead of saying homeless people,
Yeah.
I say people who are homeless, right?
Yeah.
Because they're people first.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that the same thing is true when we talk about, people come to our church and not gender specific folks. My bestie is a woman who is often called sir, right? Yes, sir. And then it's like very clearly that she's not sir, but it's offensive, but it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And I think when we say this, this gay woman came to church, or this person came and happens to be whoever they are, I think what our language patterns also need to shift in that respect.
Yeah.
Because we can't
Yeah.
continue to identify people generally based on their appearance.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's challenging.
And if we do that in our own lives, why wouldn't we do it in our church life too?
There used to be, 10 years ago, we used to have a statement in the bulletin every week that made a comment about universal language and how you honor the history and heritage along with the new understanding. And I really missed that when that went away. I was like, where did that go and what does that mean? Actually concerned me for quite a while. Are we going in a different direction?
What was the statement?
It was, I don't remember exactly.
Talking about a statement that used to be on our bulletins.
Oh, yeah, and so I don't know, I think, maybe that needs to even be updated.
Yeah.
With our new consciousness, but I like the idea of something in the bulletin explaining our commitment to this.
Yeah.
So people understand.
Mm.
And also, but, I don't know about other musicians, it's really hard sometimes to change some of the language because it just doesn't fit anymore with the tuning. And, so I read songs in another situation and I just wrote, we all know God is beyond gender and Christ is beyond the cross. And please substitute words. It's a balance between the two. It's hard to.
In the hymnal, it says, we're poetically appropriate.
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting caveat, right? Where poetically appropriate, we will shift language. And I was thinking, yeah.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I don't want it to be like, we're not gonna put it in just because it doesn't rhyme. Like
Right.
that feels like a lame reason to not
Right, exactly.
be gender neutral. So it's a balance, I think, on
It's
that.
a process, and
Yeah.
but I like that, let there be peace on earth, when you sing the creator version, and if you're singing the other version. I don't know if you ever noticed, but you come back together in harmony. When it gets to harmony, all of a sudden you come back together.
Yeah.
For me, that's always beautiful.
Yeah. This is a great statement of faith that is printed in our Constitution, PCSA Constitution. And also, if you read the beginning of the Book of Confessions, they'll tell you that these are the historical church documents that we're kind of drawing our doctrines from. And there is a large explanation to how we can read them today. We're not going to go and change that language that was written in 325, just because, that's our tradition and we're part of that tradition. And its presence attests to the progress that we've made in our understanding of God as Christians, right? It's like, this is where humanity was at the time, this is where we are, and this is what God has done throughout the ages. But they'll tell you every time in any official document coming out of the PCUSA today, if there is a male specific pronoun or term used, there's always an asterisk right next to it, and they'll explain to you in the note why they kept it that way. So this brief statement of faith is at the end of it. And the committee that put it together say that they drew extensively on the book of confessions to write that. I just want to read that a line of it. It says the brief statement of faith emphasizes gender inclusiveness. It underscores the role of both men and women in God's covenant. It uses feminine as well as masculine imagery of God, you spoke, and affirms ordination of both women and men. So you see how also our shift to ordaining women and ordaining LGBTQIA plus folks at the church is very related to how we see God, right? So I'm just stating all of these things to show you that I'm not bringing my own thoughts. This is where our denomination is today. That's it. This is where the PCUSA is. This is from our constitution.
And at least some of the congregation is right along with you, step by step, no objections, no hesitation.
I find it very interesting to know because there's, for most of us, pretty much of a disconnect between what's happening in Louisville and what's happening
Absolutely.
on N Street in Sacramento. And so I find it interesting that our denomination has moved. That far.
We have an amazing leader who has been leading the PCSA, executive president, Reverend Dr. Diane Moffat, who has changed the whole structure of the PCSA. I sit on the board of the mission agency, and the structure, everything is being deconstructed now as we speak, and they're coming up with a new structure. And we've had a department for gender equity and inclusivity that's been there, that informs everything else that's done in the denomination. So you'd be surprised to see the shift that happened at the denominational level. As you said, there is a disconnect. So I'm glad I could just bring you up to speed as to where our denomination really is, right? I would like to pass these around, but I just like to read some of those lines that are issued by the PCUSA. The diversity of the people of God is to be acknowledged and embraced in such a way that all may feel included. Every reference to God is limited in its capacity to express the reality and mystery of the one who has so variously encountered us. So just remember that whatever we use, this is our language to try and express God, and it does not describe who God is. So when we are too arrogant about our Father, and that's how Jesus said it, just remember that we're not going to capture God, right?
That's what transcendent means.
Yes.
Period.
And they say here, our language about God should be as intentionally diverse and varied as is that of the Bible and our theological tradition. This diversity should be reflected in the language and life of the church. My dream is to see all of this program on Sunday, not only the Lord's Prayer, all of it, to see gender inclusive language. When I create the program, you will never see God referred to as a he there. If you see it, it's probably copy paste, and I didn't pay attention to it. I know Pastor Wes is making that effort too, but a lot of our lay readers, like there's a worship service where I intentionally said, I think Jen was one of the people, I said, would you please, I saw he in the gospel reading, would you please say God instead, right? And one time this person showed up and they had their own reading, and it was like he, and I was like, oh gosh, I want this awareness. If you believe that this is our theology, I want us to help spread that awareness and talk to our siblings. That's the definition of church, right? We sustain each other. We sustain each other's faith, right? Like, I would like it if in your reading you could use different language. We're changing a culture. I'm running out of time here. So how many, and I don't want anyone to feel intimidated. How many people here are in favor of using only gender inclusive language in worship? How many people are indifferent? Whatever you use, I'm gonna read it my own way. And how many people are like, you guys are crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. And that's fine. That's fine. You can not like that. But what I'm saying is this is where the denomination is. And my hope is to see us just get there. I passed around a few suggestions for the Lord's Prayer, and I know some of them have shifted from the original language, and some of them tried to keep the original language that we know as close as possible, with the exception of instead of saying our Father, it's like our Father and Mother or our Creator. So tell me where you are. We don't have a lot of time. Just briefly tell me, would you rather see a whole, a creative version that's more of an interpretation of the Lord's Prayer, or would you rather just keep the original language that we know and we memorize and we love, but when we refer to God, just make it more inclusive? Go.
Not sure.
I'm ready. I'm ready
Maybe
for
we
it.
could try it a bunch of different ways.
For me, I'd rather see genderless, like creator or God, rather than mother and
Yeah.
father, because it's still keeping gender very much in the picture if you do that.
Okay, right?
I agree with that as well. I think the only thing is, I think we need to bring our family to that, not slowly is not the right word, but like, we need to kind of educate, I think, people and help make sure they understand what it is we're doing, so it's not a total shock. I think that's the way we
So before we change it in the program, and how do you suggest we do that? Because this is what I thought we're doing. And I was hoping that 100 people will be here today because this is important. And when we change it and you complain about it, if you weren't here, it's on you. Or on Zoom, right? You can do it from your bedroom.
I just think it's maybe it's just an introduction whenever we kind of
Yeah,
introduce it.
of course.
And I think it just helps, I think, people to hear it, understand kind of where we're coming.
Like during service, just like any other change we
Like
make.
any other change. we make.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thinking about Leslie's question about the folks who are connected to the nostalgia,
Yeah.
perhaps through the tradition of
Yeah.
saying it a certain way. And your point about how we need to attend to each other.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking that there might be an element of grief.
Yeah.
To let go of something that has meaning and
Yeah.
has been sustaining to folks, for their lives.
Yeah.
And so the grief often shows up as complaint or anger
Yeah.
or in other ways. And so one way to attend to our community is to acknowledge that, to change this might create some grief in some folks and some sadness. But then to your point about a change being theologically grounded, what we have to recognize is that the exclusivity of the language has also caused grief and separation in other people in our community, and maybe people who have felt like they couldn't be a part of the community. And so it's not that, one person's grief is more or less important than the other.
No.
But where can we center
Yeah.
our we can be theologically centered and move forward together on that line. And I think that's one way to say to folks, like, we can attend to your grief, but how could we move forward in a way that puts love first, which is what we're about.
Yeah. And I know there's going to be pushback, not because people don't like me or, but because it's a loss. You're changing tradition on me. I've been coming to this church for 20 years. You just came 10 months ago, right? And I really hope it's not something that's connected to me, but anyone wants to blame me, that's fine. Don't blame the church. How do we do that? Like, how do we do that?
Well, I'm coming back, I really think that a little comment in the program is important.
Yeah.
So that, and every time, because not everybody reads the bulletin, or not everybody was there when you explained it.
Yeah.
And people, if they're like me, when I saw the change, I'm like, wait, what does that mean? And I was going on all these things that weren't really, I wasn't sure about. So if you have a little statement explaining why you're doing that, or why we're making this move towards more inclusivity.
That's helpful.
I think it would be,
Yeah.
go a long way towards helping people with.
Yeah.
You know, whatever they're feeling,
Keep-
or at least how they
yeah.
approach it.
When we started using the Lord's Prayer that we have printed in the bulletin.
The ecumenical
that,
version, yeah.
Most of us had to get used to
Yeah.
that change. And it seems to me, if I remember correctly, that it says in the bulletin, ecumenical version.
It does, yeah, it
Well,
explains
how
what it is.
much more difficult is it if we say inclusive version?
Yeah, yeah,
You know, because I think when people realize that we're doing this intentionally
yeah,
and we're doing it for a reason
Mhm.
that has been given some thought and
Yeah.
consideration, we didn't just decide, oh, let's change the Lord's
Yeah.
Prayer.
yeah, yeah,
And, you know,
Yeah.
it took me a while,
yeah.
but I learned the version that we use now, and
Yeah.
I can recite it as easily as I did the version I grew up learning. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
a little flexibility doesn't hurt, but I think that putting just what we call it, what we say in the
Yeah.
bulletin,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, that this is an inclusive, ecumenical, whatever
Yeah,
word you
yeah.
want.
So we'll explain what we're doing and we'll verbally educate people and tell them this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. These are very helpful suggestions. Let's say I'm creating the program for next week. Okay? What do I
Can we
put
make
there?
copies of all of these? And make them copies of the things that we're passing around so
Oh,
that we can have,
I can make copies. I have not.
because I
But
didn't have time to read any
Yeah,
any of
yeah.
them.
The other versions, suggestions for the Lord's Prayer, are those the same that were in them?
yes, that's the same, that's the newsletter article that you may have received. So for next Sunday, well, let me ask this first. Would you like to see a different version every time or not every Sunday, but like every season? Do you like to see us kind of try with different versions, see how you like it? How do you like us to proceed?
That seems reasonable. I mean, yeah, we still have it different every week, but I
Oh.
think that
Or do you want to defer that to the worship committee? Like, if you have preferences, let us know, Jen.
I'm just gonna throw this out there. I think change happens slowly in order for it to be welcomed. As much as I want it to just be like done next week, I don't think that's going to be kind to folks.
Okay,
I think, unfortunately, right now, the world is just in chaos.
Yeah.
Like, everything is changing, everything is chaos, everything is stressful. And I think if we throw this at people next week, I don't know. I mean, I think we do a pretty good job, and I think we're working towards it, and I think that it should be a working towards situation instead of a next week make it all day. Like, that's
So,
just my gut reaction.
do you
to that.
say we talk about it a couple of times first before we actually put it in the program? Like,
Well, I think I agree that we should put in the statement about inclusive language, because we're doing that already in the Psalms, right? We're doing a lot of that, in the readings, but putting a statement in, acknowledging and
okay,
why we're doing that, making it clear and evident and clear that this is where we are moving,
okay,
and then start moving there.
all right,
I think just getting there
that's fair.
isn't gonna sit well.
Right.
So-
This is the first step in the process.
I do need to run, sorry. It's,
okay.
we have 10 minutes until, like, please make it brief, Myra.
Would it be useful possibly to have a couple of, town hall meetings with the whole congregation?
Yeah.
So that, people are better informed about the,
A couple of what meetings?
town hall meetings?
Town hall, like congregational meetings?
Yeah.
I can suggest that, yeah. We are going to have one soon, so we can bring that up in our congregational meeting.
I also think it would be interesting, and maybe the worship committee can discuss this, to, one Sunday morning, read it two different ways in the same service, that way back.
Very good idea. read it in two different ways. So I am recording all of your wonderful suggestions. If you get more ideas, as I'm sure you will, as you leave, if you want to communicate that, send me an email, send it to Pastor West, just talk to someone for, from session, or this is going to go to worship committee and to session. I cannot make that decision, right? So it has to be voted on. So if you have ideas, just shoot them our way. I'm sorry I have to run.
Please preach a sermon on this,
I'm also wondering if
Yeah.
you have a minute for inclusivity.
or two.
Like,
Yeah. And definitely.
That's how we're gonna bring the
All
congregation
right.
in is by.
Sorry, Zoom friends, I didn't ask if you had any questions, but please email me if you do.
like at those services, like.
Bye.
No Mohammedan.
Thank you so much for